Rain had a way of softening the city, blurring its sharp edges into something almost tender. On Thursday nights, just before midnight, the streets grew quiet enough for the sound of tires gliding over wet pavement to echo between the buildings. At the corner of Maple and 3rd stood a small diner, its flickering neon sign casting a gentle glow onto the slick sidewalk. Inside, the air carried the comforting scent of coffee and toasted bread, mingling with the faint hum of an old refrigerator and the rhythmic clatter of dishes being stacked behind the counter. Maya slipped into her usual booth by the window, shaking droplets of rain from her umbrella before folding it neatly beside her. She didn't need to look at the menu. The waitress, accustomed to her routine, offered a soft smile and placed a cup of chamomile tea in front of her without asking. Maya murmured a quiet thank you, wrapping her hands around the mug as if borrowing its warmth. Across from her sat an empty seat, untouched yet significant, as though it belonged to someone who might return at any moment. She opened the worn notebook she carried everywhere, its pages filled with fragments of thoughts, unsent letters, and sketches that rarely reached completion. Tonight, as on many nights before, she simply stared at the blank page. Her fingers traced the rim of the cup in slow, repetitive circles. To an outsider, she appeared calm, composed even, but there was a stillness about her that suggested something carefully contained, like a breath held for far too long. Nearly a year had passed since Maya began visiting the diner every Thursday. The ritual had formed quietly, without conscious intention, yet it became the one constant in a life that otherwise felt unmoored. She always chose the same booth, always ordered the same tea, and always left before finishing it. When she finally stood to go, she would glance once at the empty seat across from her, her expression unreadable, before stepping back into the moise. Night. At the counter sat Daniel, a paramedic nearing the end of his shift. His uniform jacket was draped over the stool beside him, the reflective stripes catching the soft overhead light. A paperback novel lay open in his hands, though his eyes rarely lingered on the pages. Instead, they drifted toward the window booth, where Maya sat, as they had done many times over the past months. Daniel wasn't a man prone to idle curiosity. Years of responding to emergencies had taught him to respect the privacy of strangers, to recognize that everyone carried burdens, invisible to the eye. Yet there was something about Maya that quietly held his attention. Perhaps it was the consistency of her presence or the way her gaze often settled on the empty seat, as if listening for a voice only she could hear. He had noticed the subtle details, how she gently aligned the sugar packets though she never used them, how her shoulders tensed whenever the diner door chimed, and how she seemed to exist within a space slightly removed from the rest of the room. The waitress, Carol, followed Daniel's line of sight and offered a knowing smile as she refilled his coffee. "She's been coming in for about a year now," she said softly. "Same night, same time. Doesn't say much." Daniel nodded, accepting the information without pressing for more. He understood that some stories revealed themselves only when they were ready. Still, he found himself wondering what had anchored Maya to this place, what memory or absence kept drawing her back week after week. Outside, the rain intensified, tapping gently against the windows like a quiet insistence. Inside, the diner felt suspended in time, a small sanctuary where strangers briefly shared warmth before returning to their separate lives. Maya lifted her tea to her lips, but did not drink, her eyes fixed on the glass as rivulets of rain traced unpredictable paths downward. For a fleeting moment, her gaze shifted toward the counter, meeting Daniel's before quickly retreating. It wasn't a look of embarrassment or invitation, merely an acknowledgement of another presence in the room. Yet something in that brief exchange lingered, a silent recognition of shared solitude. Daniel closed his book, marking the page though he hadn't read a single paragraph. He wasn't certain why Maya's quiet rituals resonated with him, only that they did. Perhaps it was because he recognized the familiar language of grief, the careful routines people build to hold themselves together when the world has shifted beneath their feet. As the clock above the counter edged closer to midnight, Maya began preparing to leave. She slipped a few bills beneath the saucer, carefully adjusted the position of the untouched chair across from her, and gathered her notebook. Before standing, she allowed herself one final glance at the empty seat. The expression on her face was subtle yet profound, a mixture of longing, remembrance, and quiet endurance. Daniel watched as she moved toward the door, the bell chiming softly when she stepped into the rain. For a moment, he considered returning to his book and letting the night continue as it always had. Instead, he found himself lingering, sensing that the fragile stillness surrounding Maya held a story waiting to be gently acknowledged. The diner settled back into its familiar rhythm, but something had shifted. An unspoken awareness that two solitary lives had briefly intersected. Neither of them knew it yet, but this quiet Thursday night marked the beginning of a connection that would slowly, tenderly change them both. The following Thursday arrived with the same quiet insistence as the last, the city wrapped in a gentle drizzle that softened the glow of streetlights. Inside the diner, little had changed. The hum of the refrigerator, the muted clatter of dishes, and the comforting scent of brewed coffee created a familiar sanctuary from the damp night outside. Maya entered with her usual quiet grace, shaking the rain from her umbrella before slipping into the booth by the window. Carol greeted her with a warm nod and placed a cup of chamomile tea on the table without needing to ask. Maya settled into her ritual. She removed her notebook from her bag, though she did not open it immediately. Instead, her gaze lingered on the empty seat across from her, as if silently acknowledging a presence only she could feel. Her fingers traced the rim of the cup, a small, repetitive motion that seemed to anchor her in the moment. To anyone else it might have appeared insignificant, but to Daniel, already seated at the counter, it was a gesture he had come to recognize as part of her quiet language of grief. Daniel had spent the past week thinking about that fleeting glance they had shared. It wasn't curiosity alone that stirred him, but a gentle sense of recognition, as though he had seen a reflection of his own solitude in her. He understood the delicate balance between offering connection and respecting boundaries, a lesson learned through years of witnessing both resilience and fragility in the people he encountered as a paramedic. He watched her for a few minutes, giving himself time to reconsider. The diner was nearly empty, save for an elderly couple sharing a slice of pie in the corner. The rain tapped steadily against the windows, creating a cocoon of sound that made the space feel intimate and safe. Daniel closed his book, realizing he hadn't read a single page. Taking a quiet breath, he slid off the stool and approached Maya's booth with unhurried steps. "Excuse me," he said gently, stopping a respectful distance from the table. Maya looked up, surprise flickering across her face. Up close, her composure revealed subtle signs of fatigue, the faint shadows beneath her eyes and the careful way she held herself as though bracing against an invisible weight. "I hope I'm not interrupting," Daniel continued, offering a small, reassuring smile. "Do you mind if I sit for a minute? You always look like you're waiting for someone." The question hung in the air, simple yet deeply sincere. Maya's fingers tightened slightly around her teacup. For a moment, she seemed unsure how to respond, her gaze searching his face for any hint of intrusion or judgment. Instead, she found only quiet kindness. The vulnerability of the moment was palpable, balanced delicately between hesitation and the possibility of connection. After a brief pause, she gave a small nod. "All right," she replied softly, her voice carrying a gentle rasp, as though it hadn't been used much that day. Daniel slid into the seat opposite her, the one that had remained empty for so long. He was careful with his movements, placing his hands loosely on the table to avoid appearing imposing. "I'm Daniel," he said. "Maya," she answered, meeting his gaze for only a second before looking down at the steam rising from her tea. An awkward silence followed, but it was not uncomfortable, merely unfamiliar. Daniel gestured toward the rain-streaked window. "Seems like Thursday nights are determined to keep us indoors." A faint hint of amusement touched Maya's lips. It does make the city quieter, she replied, almost peaceful. Encouraged by her response, Daniel continued, keeping his tone light and unassuming. I stop by here after my shifts, paramedic. The coffee helps convince me I'm still awake. Maya nodded. That sounds demanding. It can be, he admitted. But it also reminds me how important the small moments are. He paused, careful not to let the conversation drift into anything too heavy. What about you? Do you live nearby? Maya hesitated, her instinct to retreat momentarily resurfacing. Yes, she said simply, offering no additional detail. Her fingers returned to tracing the rim of the cup, a subtle signal of guardedness. Sensing her reluctance, Daniel shifted the conversation. Carol makes the best chamomile tea I've ever had, he said with a gentle smile. Though I suspect it's more about the atmosphere than the tea itself. This time, Maya allowed a genuine, albeit brief, smile to surface. I think you're right, she replied. Some places just feel safe. The word lingered between them, carrying more meaning than either explicitly acknowledged. For Maya, the diner was a refuge from memories that felt too heavy to face alone. For Daniel, it was a quiet pause between the emotional demands of his work. In that shared recognition, a subtle shift occurred, the sense that they were no longer entirely alone in their solitude. Their conversation continued in small, careful steps. They spoke about the changing seasons, favorite books, and the comfort of routines. Daniel was mindful not to press for personal details, allowing Maya to guide the pace. In turn, Maya found herself responding more openly than she had anticipated, surprised by the ease with which the silence between them felt companionable rather than oppressive. Time seemed to slow within the warm confines of the diner. The rain softened to a gentle drizzle, and the elderly couple departed, leaving the space even quieter. Eventually, Maya glanced at the clock, a habitual gesture signaling the end of her visit. She gathered her notebook and placed a few bills beneath the saucer. Thank you for the conversation, she said, her tone sincere yet cautious. Daniel nodded, offering a warm but unobtrusive smile. Thank you for letting me join you. As Maya stood to leave, she hesitated briefly, her gaze flickering toward the seat Daniel now occupied. There was a subtle shift in her expression, not quite relief, but something close to it, as though the emptiness she had grown accustomed to had momentarily softened. Good night, Daniel, she said. Good night, Maya. She stepped out into the damp night, the bell above the diner door chiming softly behind her. Daniel remained seated for a moment, reflecting on the quiet significance of their exchange. Nothing dramatic had occurred, no revelations or profound declarations, yet. The encounter carried a gentle sense of promise. For Maya, the booth no longer felt entirely defined by absence. For Daniel, the evening affirmed the quiet courage it takes to reach out to another person. In the stillness that followed, both sensed that something had begun, not a grand transformation, but the delicate unfolding of a connection rooted in empathy and shared humanity. The diner gradually returned to its familiar rhythm, but the space between two strangers had subtly transformed. A simple question, asked with sincerity, had opened the door to a story waiting patiently to be told. The following weeks unfolded with a quiet predictability. Thursday nights became a shared rhythm, an unspoken agreement neither Maya nor Daniel ever formally acknowledged. The rain did not always return, but the sense of gentle stillness inside the diner remained unchanged. Carol would greet Maya with her usual warmth, placing a cup of chamomile tea on the table, while Daniel would arrive shortly after his shift, offering a small nod before joining her. Their conversations stayed comfortably within safe boundaries. They spoke about books left half-finished, the subtle beauty of early morning streets, and the peculiar comfort of routines. Laughter appeared occasionally, soft and tentative, but it never lingered long enough to feel permanent. Despite the growing familiarity, Maya maintained a careful emotional distance, as though an invisible line separated what could be shared from what must remain hidden. One evening, as autumn deepened and the air carried a faint chill, Daniel arrived. To find Maya already seated, her notebook open but untouched. The overhead lights reflected softly in the window beside her, framing her in a quiet stillness. She seemed more withdrawn than usual, her shoulders slightly hunched, her gaze fixed on the steam rising from her tea. Daniel slid into the seat across from her, offering a gentle smile. "Long day?" he asked. Maya responded with a non-committal shrug. "Aren't they all?" Her tone was light, but it carried a subtle edge, as if the words were carefully chosen to deflect further inquiry. Sensing the shift, Daniel hesitated before speaking again. "I realized we've been meeting here for weeks now," he said softly, "but I still don't know what brings you here every Thursday." The question was asked with genuine curiosity rather than pressure, yet it seemed to ripple through the fragile calm between them. Maya's fingers, which had been resting on the edge of her notebook, stiffened. She closed the notebook slowly, aligning it with deliberate precision, as though the act itself provided a measure of control. "I just like the tea," she replied, her voice steady but distant. Daniel nodded, accepting the answer without challenge. "It is good tea," he agreed gently. He reached for his coffee, allowing the silence to settle rather than attempting to fill it. But the quiet did not ease the tension. Maya shifted in her seat, her gaze drifting toward the door, as if considering escape. "You don't have to keep me company, you know," she said after a moment, her words tinged with a faint defensiveness. "I'm sure you have better ways to spend your evenings." Daniel recognized the familiar language of self-protection. He had heard similar sentiments from patients and families, an instinctive attempt to push others away before vulnerability could take root. Instead of responding with reassurance or insistence, he simply offered a small, understanding smile. "I come here because I like it," he said calmly, "and I enjoy the conversation, but if you'd rather be alone, I understand." His response seemed to catch Maya off guard. She studied his expression, perhaps searching for disappointment or obligation, but found neither. The absence of pressure created a space in which her defenses felt less necessary, yet she remained guarded. "I'm not very good at this," she admitted quietly, gesturing vaguely between them. "At what?" Daniel asked gently. "Letting people in," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Almost immediately, she seemed to regret the admission, straightening in her seat as if to reclaim her composure. "Not that there's much to let in anyway." Daniel resisted the urge to counter her statement. Instead, he allowed a moment of silence to pass before responding. "Sometimes it's not about letting someone in," he said. "Sometimes it's just about not being alone in the same room." Maya absorbed his words without replying. Her fingers returned to tracing the rim of the teacup, the familiar gesture signaling both comfort and restraint. The tension in her shoulders softened slightly, though the emotional distance remained intact. As the evening progressed, their conversation shifted back to safer territory. Daniel shared a light anecdote from his shift. Nothing too heavy, just a moment of unexpected kindness between strangers. Maya listened attentively, offering occasional smiles, but she contributed little about herself. The earlier vulnerability retreated behind a carefully maintained facade. When the clock approached midnight, Maya gathered her belongings earlier than usual. She placed money beneath the saucer and stood, hesitating briefly before speaking. "I didn't mean to sound ungrateful," she said, avoiding direct eye contact. "I just prefer things to stay simple." Daniel nodded, his expression warm and reassuring. "Simple is good," he replied. "It leaves room for honesty." Maya offered a faint, appreciative smile. "Good night, Daniel." "Good night, Maya." She left the diner, the bell above the door chiming softly as it closed behind her. Daniel remained seated for a moment, reflecting on the evening. He understood. That connection was rarely linear. It unfolded through moments of approach and retreat, trust and hesitation. Maya's resistance was not a rejection, but a sign of the depth of what she carried, a silent testament to experiences not yet ready to be shared. In the weeks that followed, this delicate balance persisted. Some evenings Maya appeared more at ease, engaging in gentle conversation and even initiating small talk. On others, she retreated into silence, her responses brief and guarded. Daniel never pressed for more, offering instead a steady presence that communicated patience and respect. Through this ebb and flow, a quiet foundation of trust began to take shape. Maya learned that Daniel would not demand explanations or attempt to fix what was broken. His consistency provided a sense of safety, allowing her to remain present without fear of intrusion. For Daniel, Maya's gradual willingness to share even the smallest fragments of herself felt deeply significant, affirming the power of simply being there. Though the barriers around Maya's heart remained largely intact, subtle cracks had begun to form. The space between them was no longer defined solely by absence, but by the gentle possibility of understanding. In this fragile equilibrium, the stage was set for a deeper revelation, one that would emerge not through force or urgency, but through the quiet courage of vulnerability when the moment finally felt right. The first hint of winter arrived quietly, carried on a crisp wind that swept through the city and left the streets glistening beneath pale streetlights. Inside, the diner, warmth gathered in soft pockets, the gentle hum of the heater, the comforting aroma of fresh coffee, and the low murmur of late-night conversations. Thursday night unfolded as it always did, yet something in the air felt subtly different, as if the evening were holding its breath. Daniel arrived earlier than usual, shrugging off his paramedic jacket and settling into his customary seat at the counter. Carol greeted him with a knowing smile and poured his coffee without needing to ask. His gaze instinctively drifted toward the window booth, half expecting to see Maya already seated there. When the door finally chimed and she stepped inside, he noticed immediately that her movements were slower, more tentative than usual. Maya offered Carol a polite smile and made her way to the booth. She carried her familiar notebook, but tonight it appeared more worn, its edges softened by time and handling. As she sat down, she placed it carefully on the table, her fingers lingering on its cover as though drawing strength from its presence. Carol set down 2 cups of chamomile tea, pausing briefly before giving Maya a gentle squeeze on the shoulder, a silent gesture of understanding. Daniel sensed the shift and approached with quiet deliberation, sliding into the seat across from her. "You're early tonight," he said softly. "So are you," Maya replied, her voice calm but distant. She avoided direct eye contact, instead focusing on the steam rising from her tea. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. The silence was not uncomfortable, but carried a weight that suggested unspoken thoughts waiting to surface. Maya's fingers traced the edge of her notebook repeatedly, a subtle sign of inner turmoil. Daniel remained still, allowing the moment to unfold naturally without pressing for conversation. Eventually, Maya exhaled slowly and opened the notebook. Inside were pages filled with handwritten notes, sketches, and carefully preserved photographs. She hesitated before sliding one of the photographs across the table toward Daniel. It depicted a young woman with bright eyes and an infectious smile, her arm wrapped around Maya's shoulders. The resemblance between them was unmistakable. "This is Lena," Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel studied the photograph with quiet reverence. "She has a beautiful smile," he replied gently. Maya nodded, her lips trembling slightly as she absorbed his words. "She always did," she said. It was impossible to be sad around her. She had this way of making everything feel lighter even when it wasn't. The diner's ambient sounds seemed to fade as Maya continued, her voice soft and deliberate. "A year ago we were sitting right here," she explained, glancing around the booth as though the memory still lingered in the air. "It was a Thursday night, just like this. Lena had just gotten a new job, and we were celebrating. She ordered chamomile tea because she said it made the world slow down." Maya paused, her gaze fixed on the photograph. Daniel remained silent, offering his full attention. On her way home that night, there was an accident, she continued. A drunk driver ran a red light. She didn't survive. The words emerged without dramatic emphasis, yet their quiet delivery carried immense emotional weight. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the notebook as she spoke. I kept thinking that if we had stayed a little longer, or if I had insisted on driving her home, things might have been different. That night became frozen in time for me. So I started coming back here every Thursday, sitting in the same booth, ordering the same tea. It felt like the only way to stay connected to her. A tear slipped down her cheek, though she made no attempt to wipe it away. I've spent this entire year pretending that if I kept the ritual alive, I wouldn't have to accept that she's gone. Daniel felt the profound sincerity of her confession. He understood the instinct to cling to routines as a means of preserving memory and meaning. Gently he asked, "Is that why you always leave the seat across from you empty?" Maya nodded. "It's her seat. I know it sounds irrational, but it felt wrong to let anyone else sit there." She glanced at him, a faint, apologetic smile appearing through her tears. "Until you did." Daniel met her gaze with quiet warmth. "Thank you for trusting me with that," he said softly. Maya inhaled deeply, as if releasing a burden she had carried for far too long. "I haven't told anyone this," she admitted. "Not my friends, not my co-workers. They all think I've moved on. But the truth is, I've been stuck in that moment for a year." The vulnerability in her voice created a profound sense of intimacy. The diner, once merely a setting for their encounters, now felt like a sacred space where grief and memory intertwined. Maya's confession was not dramatic or cathartic. Instead, it unfolded with the quiet honesty of someone finally allowing herself to be seen. Daniel reached across the table, stopping just short of touching her hand, giving her the choice to close the distance. After a brief hesitation, Maya gently placed her hand beneath his. The gesture was simple, yet deeply meaningful, a silent acknowledgement of trust. "She must have been extraordinary," Daniel said. Maya's expression softened, a mixture of sorrow and gratitude reflected in her eyes. "She was," she replied. "And I've been so afraid that if I let go of this ritual, I'd be letting go of her." Daniel shook his head gently. "Remembering someone doesn't mean you have to stay in the place where you lost them," he said. "Sometimes it means carrying them with you as you continue living." Maya absorbed his words, their significance resonating deeply within her. For the first time, the possibility of honoring Lena's memory without remaining anchored to the past began to take shape. They sat together in silence, hands still lightly touching, as the weight of the moment settled around them. Outside, the wind whispered against the windows, while inside the diner's warmth provided a quiet sanctuary for healing. When Maya finally withdrew her hand, her expression held a subtle but unmistakable shift, an easing of the tension that had long defined her presence. "Thank you for listening," she said softly. "I didn't realize how much I needed someone to hear this." Daniel offered a gentle smile. "Sometimes being heard is the first step toward finding your way forward." As the evening drew to a close, Maya carefully returned the photograph to her notebook. When she stood to leave, she hesitated briefly, glancing at the seat across from her, not with the same aching longing as before, but with a sense of quiet acknowledgement. "Good night, Daniel," she said, her voice steadier than it had been in months. "Good night, Maya." She stepped out into the cold night air, the bell above the diner door chiming softly behind her. Daniel remained seated for a moment, reflecting on the profound trust she had placed in him. The evening had not offered solutions or closure, but it had created something far more meaningful, a shared understanding that grief, when witnessed with compassion, becomes a little less heavy to carry. For Maya, the ritual that once symbolized her inability to move forward had begun to transform into a bridge between memory and healing. The secret she had guarded for so long was no longer hers to bear alone. marking the beginning of a subtle yet powerful shift in her journey. The diner seemed quieter than usual after Maya's confession, as though the walls themselves were honoring the vulnerability that had just unfolded. The soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional clink of dishes created a gentle backdrop, allowing the moment to breathe. Outside, the wind had settled, leaving the streets glistening beneath the amber glow of the streetlights. Inside, time felt suspended, neither rushing forward nor lingering too long. Maya remained seated for a few moments after withdrawing her hand, her fingers resting lightly on the closed notebook. The tension that had once defined her posture had softened, replaced by a fragile sense of relief. It was not the absence of grief, but the quiet realization that it no longer needed to be carried in isolation. Daniel did not rush to speak. He understood that the most meaningful response in moments like this was often silence, the kind that communicates presence rather than emptiness. He took a slow sip of his coffee, allowing Maya the space to gather her thoughts. When he finally spoke, his voice was gentle and unassuming. "Thank you for trusting me with Lena's story," he said. "I know that couldn't have been easy." Maya offered a faint smile, her eyes glistening but steady. "It wasn't," she admitted. "I've spent so long pretending that everything was fine. Saying it out loud makes it feel real, but also lighter somehow." Daniel nodded, his expression warm with understanding. "Grief has a way of isolating us," he replied. "Sometimes we think we have to carry it alone to honor the person we lost, but sharing it doesn't diminish their memory. It keeps it alive in a different way." Maya absorbed his words, her gaze drifting briefly to the window before returning to him. "You speak like someone who understands," she said softly. For a moment, Daniel hesitated. He had always been careful about revealing his own past, preferring to remain a quiet listener rather than the focus of attention. Yet Maya's openness created a space where honesty felt both natural and necessary. He placed his cup on the table, his fingers tracing the rim as if grounding himself before speaking. "My wife, Emily, passed away 6 years ago," he began, his voice calm but tinged with emotion. "She had a rare heart condition. We knew the risks, but you're never truly prepared for the moment when hope runs out." Maya's expression softened with empathy, her attention unwavering. "After she died," Daniel continued, "I felt completely unmoored. The apartment we shared became unbearably quiet. Every object seemed to echo her absence. The books she loved, the half-finished crossword puzzles, even the way sunlight fell through the windows. I tried to keep everything exactly as it was, thinking that if I preserved those details, I wouldn't have to accept that she was gone." He paused, allowing the memory to settle before continuing. "Eventually, I realized that holding onto those routines wasn't the same as holding on to her. That's when I decided to become a paramedic. I wanted to be present for people in their most vulnerable moments, the way I wished someone had been for me." Maya listened intently, her eyes reflecting a deep sense of connection. "Does it help?" she asked. Daniel considered the question carefully. "It doesn't erase the loss," he replied, "but it gives it meaning. And sometimes it reminds me that even in the midst of pain, there's still room for kindness and connection." A gentle silence followed, rich with mutual understanding. Neither felt the need to offer advice or reassurance. Instead, they simply shared the space, allowing their stories to coexist without comparison or judgment. Maya glanced down at the photograph of Lena before returning it to her notebook. "I was afraid that letting someone sit in her seat meant I was replacing her," she admitted. Daniel shook his head softly. "No one can replace the people we love," he said. "But allowing someone to share the space they once filled can be a way of honoring the love that remains." His words resonated deeply with Maya. For the first time, the idea of moving forward did not feel like a betrayal, but rather an extension of the bond she shared with her sister. A subtle sense of peace began to take root within her. Carol approached, the table quietly, offering a warm smile as she refilled their cups. She sensed the significance of the moment, but wisely chose not to intrude, her gentle presence reinforcing the sense of comfort that the diner provided. As the evening progressed, the conversation shifted naturally to lighter topics, memories of favorite childhood places, the comfort of familiar music, and the small rituals that bring solace during difficult times. The transition felt organic, a testament to the trust that had developed between them. When the clock neared midnight, Maya gathered her belongings, but this time her movements lacked the urgency that had once characterized her departures. She lingered for a moment, her gaze meeting Daniel's with quiet gratitude. "I'm glad you asked to sit with me that night," she said softly. "I didn't realize how much I needed someone to simply listen." Daniel smiled. "I'm glad you said yes." They stood together near the entrance, the cool night air visible through the glass door. Maya hesitated briefly before speaking again. "I think I'll come back next week," she said, a hint of warmth in her voice. "Not because I feel obligated to the ritual, but because I'd like to." "I'll be here," Daniel replied, his tone gentle and reassuring. Maya stepped outside, pausing beneath the awning as she opened her umbrella. Before walking away, she turned back to offer a small, genuine smile, one that reached her eyes for the first time since Daniel had known her. It was a simple gesture, yet it carried profound significance, a quiet acknowledgement that something within her had begun to heal. Daniel watched her disappear into the night, feeling a sense of calm settle over him. Their exchange had not provided solutions or erased the pain of their pasts, but it had created a shared space where grief could exist alongside hope. In that space, both had discovered the gentle power of being seen and understood. Inside the diner, the atmosphere returned to its familiar rhythm, but the connection forged that evening lingered like a soft echo. It was not defined by grand declarations or dramatic transformations, but by the quiet assurance that neither of them was alone in their journey. The healing that had begun was subtle, yet undeniable, a testament to the profound impact of empathy and the simple courage it takes to share one's story. Through presence, patience, and kindness, Maya and Daniel had taken the first steps toward carrying their memories not as burdens, but as enduring expressions of love.